It's Friday, August 22nd, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. This week, we saw the start of a sea change in American politics, an escalating arms race that could send us into some sort of electoral Cold War. And what I'm talking about here is redistricting, the idea of redrawing lines in Congress to separate voters so that politicians are picking their voters instead of the other way around. And the big story was happening in Texas, where for the past few weeks, and I talked about this before in the show, Texas Democrats in the state house had fled the state to several other blue states in order to hold up a vote on redrawing the maps for Texas that would give Texas Republicans in Congress 5 more seats. And now normally those things are done on a decade-by-decade basis. It usually follows the census. That's not always the case, but usually we do it based on the census in most states because that's when we know about population changes and people deserve to be represented properly. But that's not what was happening in Texas because Donald Trump asked Texas to redraw its lines halfway through the decade so that Republicans could pick up more seats in next year's election. And now that sparked California's Governor Gavin Newsom, who will almost definitely be running for president in 2028, to threaten Texas with redrawing California's lines to pick up just as many Democratic seats in a state that is already extremely Democratic, just based on the population there. He said he wanted to redraw the lines if Texas redrew theirs. Well, this week, Texas Democrats came back home and Texas Republicans passed their new map. And Gavin Newsom made good on that threat this week by signing a bill that would start the redrawing process in California. And there have been a lot of Democrats across the country who have resisted this sort of thing, but it seems like they're coming around to the idea. Case in point, former President Barack Obama called Texas Democrats over video and had a conversation with them and then posted on Wednesday on X, over the long term, we shouldn't have political gerrymandering in America, just a fair fight between Republicans and Democrats based on who's got better ideas. But since Texas is taking direction from the partisan White House and gerrymandering in the middle of the decade to try and maintain the House despite their unpopular policies, I have tremendous respect for how Governor Newsom has approached this. He's put forward a smart, measured approach in California designed to address a very particular problem at a very particular moment in time. And it's not just Obama. Democratic senators are also weighing in, saying they want to take on this fight. Here's Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren.
We can't live in a world anymore where we pretend that everybody's playing by the same set of rules, when it's very clear that the Republicans, who are not supported by the majority of people in this country, that those Republicans are determined to rig every rule they can, to break laws, to ignore laws, in order to be able to seize power and to hang on to it. As Democrats, we have a responsibility to fight back and fight back hard. And that's what I love about what California is doing.
So we're going to hear a lot more of that from more Democrats, most likely. But the question is, who are the real winners and losers when this happens? Because in the past, when these kinds of things have been done, the winners certainly aren't the voters. It's why my guest today is redistricting expert David Daley, who is also the author of 2 books, Ratf, the true story behind the secret plan to steal America's democracy. And I'm sorry if swearing isn't your thing. That is the title of this thing. It is an actual political term for screwing your opponent over in really awful ways. And also the new book, Antidemocratic, Inside the Far Right's 50-Year Plot to Control American Elections. That came out last year, but the paperback is out on September 30th. And he and I talk all about this arms race between California and Texas that is going to spill over into other states, what it means for the health of our democracy, what it means for our power as voters, and what it means for the good of the country if nothing gets fixed. I think it's a really interesting conversation, and we also talk about what can be done to solve some of these problems, to give power back to the people instead of the politicians. But first, make sure you're following or subscribe to the show on whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, leave a comment if you're a watcher on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got brand new articles up each week. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Bluesky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. All right, let's get to my conversation with David Daley. Today's episode is brought to you by Cozy Earth. You know, as we head into this last month of the summer, the school year is on the way, or it started for many of us already, and that means a return to stressful schedules and hectic lives, or honestly, just the news with the way that it's been. If you're like me, you're looking for a way to just unwind. With Cozy Earth, you can transform your space, whatever it is, into an elevated haven where serenity and renewal intertwine effortlessly. I really like their bamboo sheets. They keep me cool, especially in these dog days of summer. And I really like their luxe robe. I'm a robe guy. I know, say what you will, but these are about as good as it gets. I'll even avoid planning things on the weekend just to spend a little bit more time in this robe. Now, Cozy Earth's products are a favorite among many celebrities. Kris Jenner praises their bamboo sheets as her nightly essential, raving about their softness and cooling comfort. And for 7 consecutive years, 7, Oprah has included Cozy Earth on her favorite things list with free shipping on orders over $50, a 100-night sleep trial, and a 10-year warranty. Cozy Earth will bring lasting luxury and comfort into your home. Visit CozyEarth.com and use the exclusive 40% off code for Make It Make Sense, MIMS25. That's MIMS25. It's good for any purchase, and it's the best deal, and it cannot be found anywhere else but here on Make It Make Sense. Now, Make It Make Sense does get a cut of that sale, but, you know, it keeps the show going. It puts you in some new sheets or towels, and it keeps me in my favorite robe. Again, visit CozyEarth.com and use the code MIMS25 for 40% off. Wrap the ones you love in luxury with Cozy Earth. Okay, let's get back to the show. David, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Let's start here with the idea of gerrymandering as a blunt tool, because what we're seeing in Texas right now, especially in the mid-decade part of this, and I think maybe you should explain some of that too, is that this is just blunt force political trauma being used against a state. And so walk me through this idea that gerrymandering and redistricting can be used as this political club, basically.
Gerrymandering, especially in its modern high-tech computer version, it's the power to draw winners and losers. And these winners and losers are determined by district lines and not by voters. And that is fundamentally anti-democratic. That is fundamentally bad for democracy, bad for states, bad for everybody. It's good for the party that draws the lines. They really like that power. What we're seeing in Texas right now has to be explaining as the backdrop of a U.S. House that is as close as it has been in years. 219 on the Republican side, essentially 216 on the Democratic side once a couple of empty seats are filled. 3 seats. So the party in power generally loses seats in the midterm election, and Republicans are trying to prevent that. You know, that's why Donald Trump calls up Texas and says, find me 5 more seats. And, you know, Texas has already been a pretty gerrymandered state over the years. The gerrymander that Texas imposed back in 2021, they win 25 of 38 seats. They could have gone further, as we're seeing right now. There were additional seats on the table. Whenever parties gerrymander, they don't want to go too far. They sometimes fear population changes, especially in a fast-growing state like Texas. They hedged a little bit. They reinforced their incumbents and didn't go all the way to maximize the number of seats that they might have won. But then 2024 happened, right? And a lot of those new voters, a lot of those Latino voters in Texas went for Donald Trump and the Republicans. So they're a little more emboldened. And with a 3-seat cushion, they're looking for a boost. So it's better to go into the midterms with an 8-seat bounce than it is with a 3-seat bounce.
And the thing, too, that I think is important to talk about is that this is happening when it normally wouldn't happen. Yes, states do these things on their own timelines, but having a president pick up the phone and call the Governor Abbott in Texas and be like, let's do this in the middle of the year or the middle of the decade, just before the midterms, is a different level of rat fucking, I think.
You know, I was going to call it brazen, but I'm glad we can call it rat fucking on this.
I read the book. I'm a fan. Yeah.
We usually redistrict once a decade. I'm usually relevant once a decade. I don't particularly enjoy being relevant twice a decade. And so if this becomes the norm in American politics, you could imagine that politicians might redistrict after every election. That if you control the state legislature, but you lose congressional seats, why not just redraw the maps immediately thereafter? This gets to the very heart of whether people choose their politicians or whether politicians choose themselves, whether there's any accountability, what representation means. And so this is an unusual play. It is a bold play. But Texas can get away with it. They're not breaking any laws. They're just breaking norms. And as we all know, in these days in American politics, norms are there to be shattered and left by the side of the road.
When we talk about what's happening in Texas, before we sort of zoom out into the broader, I don't know, rat fucking arms race, I guess we'll call it. Let's talk a little bit about how gerrymandering changed over the last 20, 25 years, because it used to be these maps were drawn by hand. And then we got really good at doing it electronically and able to split populations, spread certain populations thin, pack certain populations into places almost by the address of someone's house. Yeah. Walk me through that, because that supercharged this whole idea about picking your voters instead of the voters picking you.
The master of California redistricting back in the 1980s was a member named Phil Burton. And he used to draw districts on napkins. He and some other Republicans and Democrats would go out to bars and they would draw districts on the back of napkins. They'd call these districts their contribution to modern art, but they were guessing, right? They were using their sense of where voters were. They weren't going up and down blocks with video game precision like folks are able to now. I think all of this really changed in the 2010 cycle. That's when the computer power became so strong, when the map making software became so sophisticated, when the voter data became so voluminous that it just became really, really easy, as you say, to go through neighborhoods, to go house by house, because you have all the information on everybody. You have all the census data that can be uploaded into these programs. You have all the public data, which is really important, right? Do you drive a Subaru or do you drive a pickup truck? You might vote two different ways based on that. That's information. Do you have a gun license? That's important information. But then there's also all the private data sets, all the information that we leave about ourselves every time we go on the internet that can be sold for pennies on the click and uploaded, that reveals exactly who we are, where we get our news, what we search sometimes, right? You can find all of this and it can all go into these maps, and it's why these maps are so secure. And it's why gerrymandering today is so fundamentally more dangerous than it used to be. Because even in the 80s, the 90s, even into the 2000s, as populations changed, as a decade went on, as political events occurred that maybe caused some kind of realignment, the housing market crash in 2008, the Iraq War, 9/11, all led to boosts for one side or the other. What we're seeing now is that these district lines are essentially impervious to waves, that the lines themselves are determining winners and losers. The state legislatures don't budge. The congressional seats increasingly do not either. And we're at a point in this country in which 398 of the 435 congressional districts were non-competitive in the 2024 election. That sounds like elections in another country. It doesn't sound like elections in a democracy like the United States.
And it becomes this sort of sclerotic government then. If it's not responsive to the people that it's supposed to be representing, that's a problem for all of us, which I think is why it's important to talk about gerrymandering and extreme gerrymandering at this point. It almost feels quaint to talk about, to even use the word gerrymandering, because we it should be called something else, I think. I don't know what it is, but it should.
Rat fucking, perhaps.
Rat fucking. It should. We should just fully normalize that. If norms are meant to be shattered or broken, we should just call it rat fucking. That's fine.
Call it what it is.
Let's talk about this, what I've been calling this like rat fucking arms race that we are seeing right now. California threatening to do redistricting there to pick up, 3 seats in California? It's less than.
They're going to try to counter Texas and go for 5.
Full 5. Okay. So I saw that today, as we're recording, some California Republicans are saying that it's against the state constitution to try and do that. I don't know if that's going to hold up or not, but are we at risk for sort of I don't know, what should we call it, an electoral Cold War here between red and blue states?
Yeah, this is the summer of our gerrymandering Armageddon. I mean, here we are. Texas has kicked it off. California is going to try to counter it. California has the gold standard independent commission in the entire nation. And Gavin Newsom is going to go to voters and say, I want to temporarily suspend it and enact a 48-4 Democratic gerrymander to counter what's happening in the state of Texas. I don't think that necessarily wins. I think it's hard to go to voters after telling them that gerrymandering is bad. And voters inherently know that gerrymandering is bad, and say, we want to do it and we want to gerrymander the other side into political oblivion. But these are partisan times. All bets are off. Who knows? But this isn't going to stop in Texas and in California. Ohio is going to go next. Indiana and Missouri are looking at creating additional Republican seats. Ron DeSantis in Florida says he wants to look at least 5 Democratic districts. I don't think he can get all 5 of those, but can he pick up 2 or 3? Sure. If Republicans want to keep going, they can. They could go to Tennessee, North Carolina, Kentucky, Kansas, New Hampshire, Georgia. They have options. And the political problem for Democrats, in addition to all of a sudden embracing this idea of partisan gerrymandering that they've been saying is so bad for so long, correctly, by the way, is that they just don't have anywhere else to go on the map. They've run out of targets because this has really been asymmetric over the last couple of decades. Republicans have had a plan to use redistricting to win control and hold control of states and really push them beyond the ballot box. And as a result of that, they control more states and the ability to draw more lines. About 3.5 times as many congressional districts as Democrats have the power to draw. So Democrats keep talking about how this is a war and we're going to fight fire with fire. Democrats are out of ammo.
Right. It's sort of like if they're going to fight fire with fire, it's like bringing a match to a house fire. It's not exactly the same flame.
They've showed up with a birthday candle and they're, singing about war.
Right.
Sounds like the Democrats, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Doesn't it?
We're here to fight. Oh, also happy birthday.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Use that everywhere. That's a great one. That's a good one. When you say, and when I have said that it is Republicans who control more of the gerrymandering, and when they have done it, it has been way more of a going back to that idea of a blunt force political tool to hold, create, and maintain power. Maybe not necessarily in that order. People point out, California, they point out Oregon, New York, the court case in New York where they were accused of being overly aggressive in gerrymandering. They point to Illinois, sometimes New Mexico. So is it really that Republicans just do this worse, or do they just get more focus?
Yeah, I mean, let me take all of that one by one, because it's an important question, and I don't think anybody denies that both parties gerrymander and that both parties have gerrymandered since the beginning of time. It's as long as we've had politicians, they have loved to draw their own lines, choose their own voters. The modern story of this, which is when these gerrymanders really had the power to counteract voters, right? The districts that were drawn in the 70s and the 80s, which tended to be sort of bipartisan buddy manders, as my pal Walter Olson at the Cato Institute likes to call them. They certainly were bad, but sometimes they could be overridden by voters. right? In a wave year, these seats were not so predetermined. We had many, many times more competitive seats in the 80s and the 90s than we have now. Republicans, after the 2008 election, in which Barack Obama wins, Democrats take a supermajority in the U.S. Senate, big advantage in the U.S. House. People talked about it as if it was going to be a generational realignment, that Democrats had unlocked, the key to the future, built a coalition, demographic changes that was going to leave them in power for many, many years to come. Even Republicans were saying this, and it didn't exactly work out that way, right? And a big part of the reason why is because in 2010, Republicans had a strategy called RedMap. It's the Redistricting Majority Project. And what they did was they focused on state legislatures in 2010, because 2010 was a census year. And what do we do after the census? We redistrict. And Republicans said, what if we use redistricting as a path back to power? Let's go out. Let's win state legislatures in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Florida, Indiana, Alabama. And then the year after that, we'll have every seat at the table. We'll lock the Democrats out of the room, and we'll draw maps with this new technology that wildly advantage ourselves. This they did. In 2012, Republicans had the power to draw about 197 congressional lines around the country by themselves. Democrats could draw 41. Not much has changed since then. So have Democrats gerrymandered the places that they control? You've rattled off the states. Yes. I mean, Illinois, New Mexico, Oregon, Nevada. I would push back on California, which is a commission state. I'd push back gently on New York, which is also a commission state, but where Democrats filed some bad faith litigation and had the courts overturn it. But then when they had a chance to redo the map, they were Democrats again, and they only sort of mildly adjusted it. So New York has had pretty proportional congressional delegations these last couple of cycles. Illinois, of course, wildly the other way. And nobody is defending, or certainly I'm not here to defend the terrible behavior in Illinois or New Mexico or any of these states. But I'm certainly going to point out that it's not equal in numbers or in states. What Republicans have with the ability to do Texas and Florida and North Carolina and Georgia and Ohio and Wisconsin, Missouri, Tennessee, Indiana, far outreaches what the Democrats have been able to do and the number of seats that they control.
It's an interesting conversation to have, because I think when you do start having conversations like this with people who want to point out that the Democrats have done it too, and in the places where they've done it, it's just as bad, which, like, again, maybe not, depending on what we're talking about here. It always devolves into this conversation then with those folks about, like, well, then Republicans are just better at doing it. And maybe that's true, but also on some level, gerrymandering to this extent is fundamentally wrong and fundamentally anti-democratic. It's wrong because it's anti-democratic. Am I off base in getting to that point?
No, I think that's right. I mean, it takes control away from voters. We had 37 elections in this country for the U.S. House within 5% in 2024. That's kind of insane. And when you think about what that really means, right, it means that 398 elections were essentially determined in a low turnout party primary. Held over the summer, closed to independents, closed to the other side. If 10 people were running in that race, somebody could win it with 20% of the vote, which happens. I mean, here in Massachusetts, I think we have 2 districts represented by somebody who essentially won the seat by winning a low turnout primary with support in the low 20s. That's absurd. It means a fraction of the people in the district are picking the representative who represents everybody. And it means that the representative has no reason to represent everybody. There's no accountability. When the only accountability is in a party primary, it means your accountability is to the most extreme elements in your own base and your own party. So no wonder we have the kind of politics we have, in which people feel like it's broken, that members aren't listening to them, that they're not getting what they want, and that they have no tools to hold people accountable.
Yeah, they're not listening to them because they're not listening to them, because they
don't have to.
Right. Because as we've gotten gerrymandering in the form that it's taking here, to win those seats, you have to be more extreme. And as more Republicans have been more gerrymandered, we have seen the Republican Party run further to the right in its necessary idea of the Overton window moving, but like it is much further to its fringe than it used to be at the beginning of this century, than the Democratic Party is further to the left right now. It just is. And I believe that that's a product, not entirely, but I think a good chunk of it is gerrymandering.
It's certainly a piece of it, right? And I think you can look at it, anecdotally as well. You can look at the individual members and sort of how they won, where they came from. There was I wish I had the numbers in front of me. There was a great study of sort of what happened to the U.S. House in 2012, sort of the first year that these gerrymandered maps were used, and how, as the nation became more multiracial, as the nation became, as Black and Latino voters grew in numbers, as the electorate became younger, a majority of Republican districts became older, more rural, and more white. And so you can redraw political power and hold back demographic change and essentially the will of the people, by drawing lines that advantage your side. You can fundamentally rewire the entire electorate through district lines.
And there's a thing that you just brought up that we should talk about here when we talk about gerrymandering is gerrymandering Black and brown populations around the country out of representation and out of representative votes, because that is happening in a lot of states. It is part of what's happening in Texas. We've seen it in many other Republican states. And this has gone to the Supreme Court, which has basically then said that actually this is political line drawing and you can't discriminate against somebody based on their politics. It's not a protected class. And we can talk about that a little bit too. But let's talk about the racial component of this, because it is part of this conversation. It actually has to be.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, when you look at the districts that are being cracked and packed in Texas, so many of them are seats that are elected by Black lawmakers, by Latino lawmakers, representing communities in Dallas and Houston and Fort Worth that are being shattered and splintered. The way you gerrymander, right, is the goal of it is to pack the other side's votes into as few districts as possible, or to crack them and divide them scattered across as many districts as possible where they can't create a majority. So sometimes the metaphor that I think is useful is to think about it like a pizza that's being cut in diagonal slices. And maybe Houston is at the center of that pizza. So as you create your 8 slices, you have a little bit of Houston or Austin or Dallas in each slice, but most of it goes out from there and takes in rural, redder, central Texas. And so if you draw lots and lots of districts that take a city and splinter it across a whole bunch of districts, you can effectively annihilate representation there.
Yeah. And it is, I think, on some level purposeful. It's certainly purposeful because Black and brown voters, although 2024 is different as the Latino population shifts. I've talked a lot about that on this show. I've had Mike Madrid on several times to talk about all this stuff. But certainly black voters and are still overwhelmingly Democratic voters. And so if you're a Republican and you're redistricting, you can say you're going after, democratically controlled areas. They just have.
And that's what, the Supreme Court case, Common Cause versus Rucho, from 2019, that's why that decision was so wrong and so dangerous, and how it created so much of this current moment. The court had never really declared partisan gerrymandering legal or illegal in the past. Racial gerrymandering, however, there were guardrails on the use of race in redistricting through the Voting Rights Act, through the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. And once the Supreme Court in 2019 said that partisan gerrymandering was a non-justiciable political issue, that it could not be touched by the federal courts, it liberated all of these states to say, this is not a racial gerrymander. This is just a good old-fashioned partisan gerrymander. And that's how they will all build the record of what they're doing in these states. They will come out and very explicitly say, we are trying to draw seats that benefit the Republican Party, or, we are, David Lewis in North Carolina, right? I am trying to draw a map with 10 Republicans and 3 Democrats because I'm a Republican and I think that's the best thing to do for America. I'm paraphrasing, but only barely. And we heard really similar things out of Texas lawmakers earlier this month. They can get away with this because John Roberts allowed them to.
Is there a court case coming up, or is there the potential for the Supreme Court in this next term to take this up? I mean, certainly somebody is going to sue over Texas or California here, or whatever state happens next. Is there a way that the court will take this up, or is this one of those things, again, that the Roberts court just isn't going to want to touch with a 10-foot pole because they don't want to anger the president?
The court will take it up. They'll just make it worse.
Oh, good.
There is a case teed up from Louisiana. This is the Calais case that the court will hear the middle of October. It's a Voting Rights Act case centered on the constitutionality of drawing majority-minority districts. And this is going to be the Shelby County of Section 2. In the Shelby County case, the court a decade ago froze the preclearance formula and liberated all the southern states that had been under preclearance and said, things have changed in the South. You don't have to do that anymore.
Right. That's the Voting Rights Act case, that basically the core piece of the Voting Rights Act that protected black voters and black and brown voters across the country from discriminatory like voting laws. And the Supreme Court said, we fixed racism. We don't have to do that anymore. We're all good.
And John Roberts said, well, we're going to take away Section 5, the key enforcement mechanism, but there's still Section 2, and voters can still use that if they need to. And then the court began whittling away Section 2. And they've gotten to the point now where it's just about gone, except for the protections on majority-minority districts. This case teased that up. You might remember the Alabama case a couple of years ago. This was the Milligan case, in which John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh actually sided with black voters and the Voting Rights Act. And they said, well, a current law says this is what we have to do. But buried in Brett Kavanaugh's concurrence was a line that said, what nobody's arguing here is that time's up, that we just don't need this any longer, that we fixed racism in the South, and we don't need these districts any longer. Some smart people in Louisiana recognized that as what it was, an invitation to bring another case. And that case has arrived. So what you might see is that the remaining protections at the federal level against racial gerrymandering are about to disappear. That too would have political consequences. It would mean that South Carolina and Georgia and Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi might all take a look at redistricting next year. So while we're in the middle of this gerrymander summer, hot, wild gerrymander summer, we might have yet another one next year.
I want to move on to some things too that you'll hear people talk about as we continue our summer of discontent. Is there a way in which this gerrymandering goes too far and you end up diluting too much of the the people like that these parties are trying to put into their own districts. There's a lot of argument that it might just end up splitting a population too much, and it might backfire on a place like Texas or next year in say like Indiana. Is that a thing, or is that just wishful thinking from a lot of Democrats?
I think it's wishful thinking from a lot of Democrats who don't have a whole lot of options other than trying to scare Republicans and tell them they might go too far. It's kind of like a birthday candle. I don't think that, there is not a modern example in the last 15 years since maps became so high tech of a map backfiring. Not at the state legislative level, not at the congressional level. You go back, you look at 2018 when Democrats managed to take back the House. They did this by winning states where maps had been drawn by courts and commissions. They did not do it by beating gerrymanders. They had new maps in Pennsylvania, new maps in Florida, new maps in Virginia. They won seats in unexpected suburban places where people were not happy with the president. Suburban South Carolina, suburban Oklahoma, suburban Utah, Indiana, right? So they did not budge the maps in Ohio or Wisconsin or North Carolina. They picked up a seat in Michigan, a seat in Texas, yes, but that's not, one seat in a wave year is not a map backfiring. That's actually a map that's working pretty well and defending you in a wave year. Republicans in Texas have got a lot of room. It's a 25-13 map.
Mm-hmm.
One of those Republican seats is under 60% for the winner. Only one. Of the other 24, 11 are between 60 and 65% R seats. The other 13 are over 65 or non-contested. So there's plenty of R voters to move around Texas without this becoming a dummy mander. Now, can you go too far? Can there be a big enough wave? Sure, but it would have to be a really, really big wave. The two-party congressional vote in Texas these last 2 years has been R plus 20 and R plus 17. So to imagine these maps gerrymandering, you would have to backfiring. You would have to imagine a D plus 12, which is about a 30-point shift in some of these states. I think it's hard to imagine.
Right. That's just not going to happen.
Impossible. Nate Silver would say it's not statistically impossible, but I think it's realistically impossible.
Yeah, practically impossible. Absolutely. There's this thing too that also one of the big conversations I've been having on this show over the last almost 8 months now is, actually exactly 8 months as of today, is that we're losing so much government data. We're losing good census data. We are losing BLS data. That's going to be out the window now. We're losing all of this government health data. We are losing all of the things that these software programs to design gerrymandered districts use. Are Republicans shooting themselves in the foot by collapsing our good government data when they want to redistrict in the future? Not this year, but maybe 2 years down the road.
It's a really interesting question. I haven't thought about that. Sure. I mean, if there's a less reliable census, some of the data that they use for redistricting will be less reliable. Now, on the other hand, I think the census count is probably about to become a whole lot less reliable, right? The census relies on knocking on people's doors and saying, I'm with the government, tell me who lives here. That's not the most popular question
right now. Yeah, absolutely.
So, are we going to get an accurate count in some of these states regardless? But I like that your question at least suggests that we're still going to have elections in 2030.
I mean, I gotta at least right now, I gotta keep saying that. I think too that there's this idea that in in losing all of that data, I think the flip side of that idea is in losing all that data, they'll just make up their own, and that actually could make this somehow worse. Which I know. I don't know.
I'm supposed
I'm
to
not
be
really
the doom
sure.
and gloomer here.
I know, and so there is that thing, right? There is that. I do want to ask: is there a way out of our current gerrymandered system? Is it forcing a federal law to do this, which they won't pass? Is it expanding the House, because we haven't done that in 100 years? Is it something like that to make government more representative, or are we just too far gone?
We need a national standard, right? Because this is a national problem. It needs a national fix. The courts have made that harder. Congress, as you said, unlikely to provide the solution. It could do it. Will it? It requires the very members who have gerrymandered and who win that way to say, okay, we're done here. I think, again, that might be wishful thinking. But we know how to fix this, right? The very best way to fix this would be a more proportional House in every state. The best plan, I think, is the Fair Representation Act that's been advanced by Don Beyer and Jamie Raskin in the House, which combines multi-member districts, larger districts that can't be gerrymandered because it doesn't matter where the lines go. And you combine that with ranked choice voting so that every single district is going to elect 3, 4, or 5 members in relation to the vote in that area. You can't gerrymander a party out of power when the vote is proportional in a larger district, right? Even here in Massachusetts, where it's almost impossible to draw a Republican district, if you draw 3 districts of 3 here, you will get a Republican in each of them. If you were to draw 3 districts of 3 and elect proportionally in Tennessee, you would get a Democrat in each of those. So I think that's how we solve the gerrymandering problem, is we move to a more proportional House, and we fix it absolutely everywhere in a nonpartisan way. This would be as simple as Congress passing a law and deciding to do so. Maybe this current moment gets so bad that we finally have the national conversation we need about how to fix this, and things can get better.
Do you think there's actually the will, not even the political will, just the moral will to do that right now? Because I think that's the thing that's getting in the way here.
The moral will among politicians, no, but the moral will among voters, 100%. Voters hate gerrymandering. It doesn't matter whether they're Republicans, Independents, Democrats. There's a YouGov poll just a week or so ago that's continued to show big majorities across all party lines opposed to the idea of gerrymandering, in favor of the idea of commissions, very much against politicians drawing their own districts, choosing their own voters. Voters get this, right? Almost every place where this is on the ballot, doesn't matter if it's a red state, a blue state, or a purple state, voters despise this activity. 75% in Ohio in May of 2018, big majorities, establishing commissions in Michigan and Colorado, victories in 2018 as well in Missouri, in Utah. I mean, this is not a popular activity. In Florida in 2010, the constitutional amendments establishing fair districting win with more than 60% in the Tea Party year. So voters get this. They hate it. It's why politicians feel the need to keep going, right? This is in many ways a war between voters and their own representatives. And voters have been able to fix this in states where there's ballot initiatives, but not every state has that. So here we are.
Well, David, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
I want to thank David again for coming on the show. You can find links to both of his books, including the pre-order list for Antidemocratic, Inside the Far Right's 50-Year Plot to Control American Elections, in the show notes on this episode. And that is it for this episode. Please rate and review the show, whatever podcast app you listen to this on. Like, subscribe, leave a comment on YouTube. It really helps boost the show there. sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got a brand new article up this week that now includes the quote from the Department of Homeland Security, which calls me deranged. Why they called me that? You'll have to read the article to find out. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Granthermes on Twitter and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Granthermes, and I'll talk to you next week.